Wholeness means to me being in a state of joy.
Wholeness means feeling complete, owning my authentic gifts.
Wholeness is really connected. Everything is connected to everything.
Wholeness is where we have access to all parts of ourselves.
Figi is an ERYT 500 yoga instructor and is one of the founding yoga teachers featured on DoYogaWithMe.com, which she has generously given our listeners a 6-month premium membership. So make sure you check the show notes for that amazing offer. She reaches thousands of people around the globe. Figi has trained extensively in California, Costa Rica, and Canada. Her classes are often described as a strong practice that allows students to face challenges with support and guidance, inspiring them to move forward fearlessly and more consciously. I felt chills as we talked about the power yoga can have on the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical bodies. And look for some of her amazing videos in the Wholeness Library coming soon. We're so excited. The link will be in the show notes as well. If you haven't checked out the Wholeness Library, what are you waiting for? A little every day is all you need. So try it and see for yourself. So enjoy this episode and please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts.
My entire journey with yoga began because of healing. And I came to yoga because I had a really serious back injury when I was in my early 20s, which is a really odd time in your life to have a significant and almost debilitating back injury. So I was in chronic pain and I was seeing all the doctors, the physio, doing all the things that everybody said to do, and nothing was really helping. And at one point, the physio that I was seeing suggested I try yoga. And I was like, okay, I was willing to try anything. When you have back pain, listening who's had some ongoing back pain, you will pretty much do whatever it takes. So I went to a class because I was told to go and try it. And I took the class and I experienced a little bit of relief from it. And just that little bit of relief was enough to make me want to go back. So I kept going back, relieve the pain in my back. And then over the course of, I don't know, probably a couple of months, I stopped thinking so much about going for my back, and I was just going because I was enjoying it, and I was growing in so many different ways. And then eventually over time, the back problem just resolved. Our body is amazing. It just heals itself over when we give it some time. And then I was hooked. Yoga had sort of gotten in there and started doing other work. And I was in it. I was in it first because of the back pain, but then I was just immersed in yoga and falling in love in the practice. And it's interesting because I went for this sort of really superficial reason of like that back pain, but during that period of my life, I was also struggling pretty intensely with anxiety and had really so low self-esteem and had pretty chronic eating disorder that was getting to the point of being dangerous. And I didn't know that yoga was going to help heal that. And if I did know that yoga was going to help heal that at the time, I probably wouldn't have gone. Because when you're in the throes of those things, you don't really want help and you don't want to change. And so I went to yoga thinking it was just a physical thing. Like this is just for my back, right? And it ended up healing a lot more than that. So my back got better. And then I learned how to take care of my body, how to feel again, how to be okay with my feelings, and then just, heal sort of from the inside out. And it was another one of those sort of progressional changes where I don't exactly know when the grips of the eating disorder dissolved. It was somewhere in this sort of zone of a couple of years. And then I sort of came out the other side like, wow, how did that happen? So that's how my journey with yoga began in healing. But I've been doing yoga since my early 20s, so over 20 years now. And it's always coming back. I'm learning about healing over and over again. Sometimes I'm on the mat with injury, and so I'm having to move with compassion and empathy for myself, or just really clear focus and presence, because if you've got an injury, you need to be mindful. Or I'm healing, another aspect of myself that I encounter on the mat, because you're always rubbing up against resistance. So I think yoga it's about healing in general.
I want to back up for a minute. So, do you know any of the history of yoga? I mean, it's always just kind of been there, but let's kind of look at that for a minute. Where did it come from? And
Okay, yeah. So yoga has been around for thousands of years, actually, more officially documented for a little over 3,000 years. But a lot of the things that we are learning through yoga, they are concepts that have been around and have been embedded in most of the ancient and ageless Eastern traditions that we see. And there's a lot of overlap with other Eastern traditions. So, in a more organized fashion, though, we started to get some documentation that allowed us to learn by reading and have practices to follow. And a lot of what we think about now as yoga is not yoga. So, there is a misconception in the West, which is the asana practice. So, what we're doing on the mat is part of yoga, but that's not what the word yoga means. That is asana practice that's meant to help with the physical body and health. But the practice of yoga itself is an entire lifestyle. It's an entire philosophy that has many different limbs. And the asana practice is just one of those limbs, a very useful one, especially for people in the West. I think meeting us where we are in that physical realm is a great way to get us into the journey. So yeah, it's been around for thousands of years, and these teachings, as old as they are still so relevant. And that really just goes to speak with the human experience. The things around us can change, but the things that we're encountering within us, I think, are what unite us. And that's really what yoga means. Yoga is union, and that there's a connection between everything. And so we're all experiencing sort of the same things. We're all going through the same cycles, the same seasons. And so it is this sort of just deep wisdom of how to kind of navigate the pathways of life with a little more harmony.
So, why do you think it picked up in the West? Why has it become more popular? What is it that's drawing people in?
Yeah, so it's been picking up in popularity, really, I would say, since the 60s on a slow upkick. But there's been a huge influx, of course. A lot of that has to do with the internet and just awareness, right? So awareness is just like a light. When you shine light on something, everyone can see what's going on there. So the internet really brought all the things that people may not ever get the opportunity to encounter. It brought it to everybody's front door. So people in little towns and all across North America who may not have ever met a yogi now have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about it. So I think the internet is one of the reasons that it's spread so rapidly. And the other reason I think that people are leaning into yoga so much right now is kind of also because of the internet, but for the inverse reason. So I feel like we're getting really cerebral. We're getting really like in this virtual world instead of the real world. We're getting so caught up in our thoughts and like the threads of emails and the things that we have to do that aren't tangible, that we're seeking to create balance. I think that most organisms are always looking at homeostasis. How do I bring myself back into balance? There's that natural instinct. And so, because we're being so pulled into that sort of other realm, our body is saying, I just need something physical. And so, that physicality of the asana practice in the West right now, I think is very healing. I think it's a way of bringing us back into what's real and giving us that grounded and embodied experience so that we're not completely untethered from our bodies and just going out into the multiverses that we could go out into. So I think that people are craving that physical connection again. It brings us back to our humanness. And I think that we're missing sort of that simplicity. I think when you step onto your mat and all you're asked to do for an hour is to be in one spot and to feel the ground or feel your arm or your leg or think about your breath, there's something so nurturing for the mind about, oh, I can do that. And that's real and that's tangible. And it's just so calming for the nervous system.
Yeah, I think Bessel van der Kolk in The Body Keeps the Score talks. He says the yoga is one of the major trauma releasing things that you can do, because there's that holding and then letting go and holding and letting go, and surviving past and moving beyond that can tell our nervous system we're going to be okay. So I think it's a fascinating, that it's so much more, like you say, it's so much more than just an exercise, it's so much deeper.
Yeah, and it really, like, that's what that book actually speaks to as well, is the potency of doing work in the subtle body.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what makes yoga different than other modalities that are physical. Because if we just say, "Oh, people getting physical is gonna be the thing," then an exercise class of any form could essentially be that. But why is it that yoga seems to be more transformative and healing in the other aspects of our life? And it's because yoga is working on that subtle body realm, which is it's where the physical body and our mental and emotional body converge. In that overlap zone, that's the subtle body. And that's where we're working in yoga. We're working on that subtle body. So in any pose, you can be simultaneously releasing tension in your hip and also the reason that you grip in the hip. So that's usually might be associated to some other psychological pattern, or the reason your shoulders are so tense because of the weight you feel you're carrying. So there's so many different things that we're working with in yoga that allow us to untangle that tension or that energy that's being consumed somewhere unnecessarily. And when it speaks of that release as well, when we release some form of tension, which is dense in nature, you're freeing up energy. And people forget about this. It's not, why don't I have enough energy? It's, you do have enough energy. Where is your energy being consumed constantly? And so it's this idea of repression instead of release. And when you speak about trauma, like you brought up, trauma response is often repression. And to hold something down requires muscular force. So if I'm repressing something, there's 10% of my overall energetic, availability is being used in holding it down.
Mm-hmm.
So if that process were interrupted for some reason, now I suddenly have 10% more energy to do something else with.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga is allowing, instead of that repressing, it's allowing the releasing, which then allows the energy to kind of go somewhere else and do something that's more productive and helpful.
So is that work in the subtle body happening because of the poses, or is the instructor is intentioning that, or how would you describe that?
It is a fairly intricate process. One of the most important parts of it is the simplicity of the breath. Mm-hmm. So it's the coordinated movement with breathing slow and low. So the breathing practices that we're doing in the yoga practice, where you're meeting resistance, but you're meeting resistance and now you're breathing slow and low. So this is a major reset moment for the body, because typically when we meet resistance, we go into sympathetic mode, which elevates the heart rate and it moves the breath into the upper part of the lungs. So it's short. And that's the response to any type of stress. That's normal. When we're breathing slow and low into the lower lobes of the lungs, that's when the body is in the parasympathetic, because it perceives that it's safe. Mm-hmm. Because you can't be breathing slow and low if there's an imminent threat. Right? Like there's a tiger trying to get at me right now. Right. I'm probably not going to be sitting here breathing slow and low. And so if you're breathing slow and low, your brain and your body are going, okay, we're safe. We can relax. But now I'm doing that. I'm being guided by a teacher on how to maintain that slow, low breath while I move into a pose that makes me uncomfortable, that makes me encounter resistance. So I'm engaging with stress, but I'm turning off the stress response. Mm-hmm. So that's really where the power is happening. So a teacher who focuses on maintaining the breath while doing the poses is really setting the stage for the students to have that deeper experience. Mm-hmm. And then there is power and potency in the sequencing. So energy moves through the body in a systematic way. And when you become a yoga teacher, you learn the pathway that it goes through. So through the poses, you are trying to encourage it to move from sort of the root to the rise of the crown chakra. So you're trying to move that energy systematically up through the system with poses in sort of a certain order.
I keep picturing one of my sons, he's an adult now, but when he's in preschool, his preschool teacher and was an instructor for yoga. And so that was one of the things they did. And so I remember him coming home from preschool and showing me his tree pose. And in my mind, I never thought about it until I was listening to you, but I remember him adding a breath, like it was important to have the breath. And I thought, I was really grateful for her to incorporate that at such a young age, because it was just a good foundation to have. It's a good thing to know and to learn. You say that yoga is a dress rehearsal for life. You say that.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that. I thought that was so intriguing.
Yeah. So I really find, and this is the cool thing too, one of the things that I love about teaching, especially when I teach in a studio that's a community and I get to see students kind of come to the mat for the first time and then watch over the course of years how yoga changes them. And what we're practicing on the mat is shaping and shifting our self-perception. And it's changing subtly our behaviors on how we meet resistance. So that doesn't stay isolated on the vacuum of your mat.
Mm.
Whatever you're practicing there is going to be the way that you end up meeting resistance in your relationship when you go home. It's going to be how you meet resistance when you're experiencing some situation with a friend or a coworker. So we're learning principles through yoga on the mat that are also incorporated of things like ahimsa, nonviolence, satya, truthfulness, non-hoarding. So we're learning all of these principles on the mat. We're practicing them. We're putting energy into action, and then they become part of our being. And then that being then leaves the yoga studio and goes out into the world and starts to navigate the world a little bit differently. And so many times I'll get a student who will come to me and say, I started doing yoga like a year ago, and I definitely feel better in my body. But the cool thing is that the rest of my life is really better too. Like my relationship is a bit better, and my job, I like my job more. Like, they see the ripple out, and it's not because anything in their external world really changed. They've changed in how they're navigating or meeting that external world.
Mm.
So if they're changing the way that they respond to resistance as they go out into these different situations, everything changes. And that's the one beautiful thing we learn on our mat is this is where the locus of control is. And we're trying to do the opposite. We walk into life and we want everybody else to change so that it works for me. Instead of going, this situation isn't working for me, what can I change? This is really the only thing that we can shift. So when we step onto our mat, I always think about it as like, what am I learning about myself and my patterning when I'm in Warrior 2 for 3 minutes and getting frustrated? How is this relating to other parts of my life? Is there an impatience? Is there a need to rush? Is there the ability to settle into the moment and accept? What can I release? How can I think about this differently? So I think that's a big part of how it is a dress rehearsal. And the other part that's really powerful too, that is great to watch happen, is the shift or the change in self-perception. So the way that people see themselves, not just the outside world anymore, but the way that they see themselves it changes. So when you're doing something on the mat, like often people will come to yoga and they're like, I can't go to yoga, I'm not flexible. Well, that's why you go to yoga, right? It's all right. So they come in thinking about themselves, I'm not flexible. Now, remember, what we believe about ourselves on the mat, also we believe about ourselves in the rest of life. So that statement, if I'm not flexible, is an affirmation, right? You're probably living into that in places other than your mat. So you come onto your mat, and over the course of time, because things take time, you gain flexibility. And now you go from going, oh, I thought I was not flexible. Turns out I'm kind of flexible. Then that shows up in life. Be more flexible there.
That's fascinating. I also know we're kind of focusing on this. I'm glad you brought up that mental body, emotional body, and we're kind of focusing on the spiritual body for a few weeks. And a lot of people do consider yoga kind of a spiritual practice, and how would you correlate those two?
Yeah. So the beautiful thing about yoga is that it can be as much as you want it to be. It is the practice of expansion. So for me, yoga is also a spiritual practice, but people can step into it as just something that they are doing for the physiology of their body and the neurology of their brain, if they're really that kind of literal type of a person. And that's great as well. But really, what it is it's allowing us to expand our awareness in the realm of connection. So for me, spirituality really is this idea of interconnectedness, that everything is interconnected. And the more that I can feel connected to, the bigger my spiritual sphere gets. So we start really little, like, oh, this is only me, and I only am in relationship to these things right here. But as that slowly starts to spread and ripple out, your sphere of energy and spirituality also can expand. And that's, I believe, what we kind of need right now in the world is more of a realization that we are interconnected. And if we're feeling that way about each other, then it's going to make us less likely to be okay with harming each other. If we feel more of that connection with the environment and nature around us, it's going to mean that we're going to live with more consideration and do things in a way that are not going to negatively impact the environment. So I believe that sort of the seed of sort of spirituality is connection, and that if we can expand connection with more people, then I think everything gets better.
I love that. Yeah, I think spiritual body is connective, very connective, but I loved your idea of expansive. I think that's really powerful. Yeah, that's where that fits, is in that spiritual part of us, is that expansive part, the part that can think beyond boundaries and bring in things we didn't think we could do, and like you say, it might take some time.
Yeah.
But the possibilities, it's open to the possibilities, I think that's just amazing. Share a little bit more about how it has changed people and how it has affected, or maybe been a surprise in people's lives, that it's been more than just an exercise, more than just a class at the gym.
Yeah, no, it's really funny too. I always kind of make that joke of like, everyone's coming to a yoga class for a different reason. And most of them are superficial at the beginning, and then they expand and morph into something that is so much different than that. I mean, the stories they're endless. I mean, I've been teaching now for a little over 20 years, and most everyone that I've met and had a relationship with in the yogic sense for a long enough time, I've seen incredible growth and transformation. And the beautiful, like the part about this is so cool, is that one of the things yoga does teach in sort of more of that formal way is that each person has the ability to evolve within a single lifetime. So when we take that on, because I think a lot of people don't get that. I think a lot of people are like, no, this is just me. I'm this is my mindset. Take it or leave it, like it or don't like it. I'm stuck in my ways. I'm grown up now. I'm not going to change. It's not like you're just settling on yourself. People don't realize that they're committing to that. That's a choice, right? So, or we can have a different mindset, which is, this is how I am and who I am right now. How might I want to evolve that or change or grow that or shape that differently? What am I representing right now? And the word represent means represent, right? So I'm just presenting this thing over and over, the same thing every time. Or do I want to represent something slightly different? Do I want to take a sidestep over here and actually grow more into somebody who is more patient and empathetic? Do I want to grow into someone who is more spiritual and open-minded? What is it that you want to grow into is really what I'm often asking my students. Where are you feeling stuck or stagnant? And where do you want to see if you can evolve and grow and shift and change something? Because that's the exciting part. And we all have connected with that when we were younger and the learning processes, and we were encouraged to be growing. we were told, oh yeah, your brain is growing, you're going to change and build your character right up until this date. And then we're kind of told it stops, right? That's a self-imposed ceiling. It's fake. We don't stop at 18. You know, it goes as long as we choose to make it go. And so I find that the people who have that sort of awakening of, oh, I can keep evolving, I can actually think about the values that I really want to embody and present to the world, and I can grow into those values, and I can be outward facing and inward facing that person. That's really exciting to me. And I've seen students when they have that moment of awakening and they realize it's within their power. And then also what we learn on the mat is that we are powerful enough to do it. Those are when you see the really big changes happen. I've seen quite a few of those types of shifts in teacher trainings. So I've led a few teacher trainings, which are nice because they're kind of a longer drawn out journey where you really kind of get into the nitty gritty for a long time and people are asking those questions. And in those ones, I've really found that people kind of have those blossoming moments a little bit more. I've had people who've gone into a teacher training, I swear, as one type of person or character, and they've come out the other side 9 months later, someone who you just wouldn't even recognize as the same person. They just are so different in their behaviors and their belief structure about themselves. And that's really like, it doesn't matter to me, you know, do you have toned yoga arms or legs? That's not important. It doesn't matter how good you look in your Lululemon pants. It's how good do you feel about the person that you are? And that's what we're working on. That's what I'm toning. I'm toning that inner person of who I want to be and show up as. And I want it to be in alignment. I think that's where the biggest rub is and where people have so much suffering is when the person who shows up on the outside is different than the person that they feel they are on the inside.
For good or bad.
Either way. Yeah.
Right.
It can be either way, right? So they might feel like they're presenting a fake self that's not really them and they don't feel worthy enough. Or they feel, you know, sort of the opposite, that they show up and they mess everything up, but really they know inside they're a really good person. I think it's when you're able to, it's like the fusing together of, you know, that intention and action kind of a piece. And that's what yoga is also really good at. Like I'm learning to move my arm in a certain way because I'm learning how to intentionally do something. So it's the translation of my intention with the right action. That term is used quite often in yogic text, which is right thinking or right action. So I'm not doing this by mistake. It's on purpose and for a purpose. And so we learn it in our body, but then we learn how to do that in the world too. I know what my intention is. Now I know also how to interact in this situation that would be in accordance to that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think what's interesting, especially as you're comparing the you know, a spiritual practice and the yoga practice, is that word practice. You know, that the idea that it is a practice, something that is always evolving, always transforming, something you don't, maybe, I don't know, you tell me what you think about it, but maybe something, it's not a destination to be reached, even though a lot of people, you know, they're trying to get to this certain pose, you know, that they can hold, you know, there's milestones, I guess, but I think it's more than that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I have something I say quite often in my classes is the pose is not the point. So if you're focusing on the pose, you're missing the point. Traditionally, often the poses, the asanas were given through Ayurveda, which is a sort of a medical type system, sort of the sister science of yoga. They were given to people sort of like a prescription to help with different things. And then once you were able to sort of do that pose kind of perfectly, you don't need to do the pose anymore. Time to stop doing that pose. It's not getting you anything anymore. Because what you're getting is you're growing into something through the process of moving through the pose. It's one of the reasons in my classes, I don't actually adjust very much, like make physical adjustments, because there's no rush to get the pose to look a certain way. I want you to learn how to move your body that way, because in the process, you're going to learn how to meet resistance. You're going to learn about patience. You're going to learn about self-compassion and not pushing yourself. So those are what yoga is about. It's learning those lessons and evolving yourself. So it's not about getting a pose to look a certain way. You're really it is the process. It is the practice. It is the consistency. It is the devotion. It's the coming back. It's meeting yourself wherever you are that day and allowing yoga to meet you wherever you are, which is so great. So you don't have to be any fitness level. You don't have to be any flexibility. You don't have to be any amount of strong to start yoga. Yoga just meets you exactly where you are and allows you to grow in whatever direction you point it.
That's so yummy. That just feels
so
yummy. Yeah. I love
it's so
that.
inclusive too. I mean, that's the beautiful thing. And that's where things can get really tricky nowadays, when things are glamorized. When you see, Instagram or Facebook, and it's the yoga poses are some chiseled model in a bikini on a beach in the water doing a yoga pose. Like, I don't understand what that has to do with yoga at all. It's a pretty picture, but that has nothing to do what yoga is. And I think that those images are discouraging to a lot of people. And that's what makes me sad, is that it's discouraging some people from thinking that they fit in the group of being in a yoga class. I want people to see the picture of a real yoga class. I'm teaching tonight. I love my Tuesday night class. It is a mix of 12 to 20 people from 18 to 75. And the 75-year-old outposes almost all of us in the class. She's amazing. But it's every shape and size, every gender, every aspect of being, just coming and doing whatever they can. Sometimes people rest half the class. They just need to be there on their mat. Other times, like, people are adding in extra handstands if they're an advanced student. But we have everyone from really beginner up to advanced, all just kind of doing what you can do. And that's what I want people to see as yoga. Yoga can meet me wherever I am today. And it can be there as much as you need it to be.
Yeah, that's so helpful, because I guess I didn't think about it, but it's true. There is a type. I guess we assume, like a ballet dancer is a good yoga person, where or there's like maybe we think there's a certain etiquette to it, or to start from scratch feels like, like we're holding everybody back or something like that. So I really appreciate that you kind of opened that up, because I think that's true. I think that does stop some of us from joining a class, making sure that we aren't, it's like I say, there's just, it's kind of a world that you have to discover a little bit, so I think that's very helpful. Well, I love it. And so you have online classes that you do, is that right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually going to make that point right after we just had that little conversation about the reluctance. And this is one of the ways that online yoga can be really helpful. There's quite a few reasons that it is helpful. One is that if you are, like, a lot of people do feel insecure about going and stepping into a class and not knowing what it's going to be like, and not knowing any of the foundational basics. That's daunting. I remember going to my first couple classes and feeling completely lost and like an outsider. So online yoga can be great for that, because you can take beginner classes at home by yourself. No one's watching. It doesn't matter what you wear. It doesn't matter if you're resting half the time. Or I joke with my students all the time. I'm like, I know you're probably out there swearing at me right now while I'm on the screen. You can do whatever you need to do, right? You can pause the video. So it's really great in helping people get over that first hurdle of, I can't do it because I don't know how. It allows people to do it in a more safe and controlled environment. So there are great online resources. I do teach on a website called doyogawithme.com. And we're actually one of the first online streaming platforms. We've been around since 2009. So we have, I think, over 1,000 yoga classes, and they're really well filtered too. So my classes are more dynamic, but we have amazing beginner teachers. So you can choose a 20-minute class that's a basic beginner class, and you can be guided really gently through a sequence by Melissa or by David, who are great beginner teachers. And then you can slowly work your way up into different types and styles of yoga as you feel comfortable to do that. So that's a really great thing too, is you can really sort of tone the dial on what you need in the moment. You've got more control there when you've got the online practice. The other reason that it's really great right now, I'm not sure if you're experiencing this where you are, I'm sure a lot of listeners are, is affordability is a really big issue right now. Where I live here in British Columbia, it is becoming something that is making a lot of people have to make some really hard choices. And unfortunately, going to a yoga studio is one of the first things that a lot of people have to drop, because going to a yoga studio right now is expensive. It's become a really great industry, and it's not cheap. Like, if I didn't teach classes, I don't know if I would go to studios because it's so expensive. So at least by being a teacher, I get to have free classes. It's great. Yeah, so online is great in that it removes the financial barrier. There are some sites that charge a lot of money, but like our site has free user accounts. We always want to ensure that people can have access to yoga. And then like location, like I know in lots of places across the United States, especially, there are not yoga studios around. So even if there was one to go to and I could afford to go there, there's isn't a studio. So removing those barriers is a great reason to have an online practice. And then, like, I have 2 kids. You just mentioned as well, you have a son who's grown up now. During the times when my kids were younger, now they're 7 and 9, so it's a little bit easier. I can say, okay, I'm going in my room to do my class, and they're okay. But that's just a recent shift. For years before that, if I wanted to do a yoga class, like I had to, find the time and space. And so online is really great. Your baby is napping. You get to pop your computer up and you can do a 20-minute yoga class. For a mom, that can be a life-saving moment in a day where you're just sort of spiraling and being overwhelmed. So it also just allows us to fit it in a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would be the different levels? Maybe not all of them, but what would you expect at a beginner versus another level? What things change over those kind of like you say, levels?
So the great thing about the beginners classes is that the pace is often quite slow, like a little bit slower, and there's a lot more instruction going on in each pose. So our instructors are phenomenal. Like we only work with sort of key instructors that we know. I know all of our instructors personally. So they're really describing what you're doing in the pose so you feel safe, so you don't feel lost, and so that you are sort of engaging in building your capacity over time. So you want a beginner level instruction where it's not just that the poses are easy, right? But that you're getting the foundational knowledge so that you're like, okay, I know what downward dog is now. I've been given adequate instruction so that I know what downward dog is. It's kind of like the difference, between saying, okay, I want you to go into the kitchen right now and make an exquisite French omelet, right? If you've never done that before, you're going to end up maybe making scrambled eggs if you're lucky. So what's the difference between the two? You've had somebody who's explained how to do it and was a talented teacher. So you want someone who's a talented teacher, just kind of explaining those basic things. You learn how to breathe in the beginner classes as well, which is a really great foundation. You learn those poses that come up quite frequently, how to transition. You also learn a lot of modifications. So it's like, okay, if you have an injury here, you can try this. So once you have modifications, as you move maybe to an intermediate class and you're exploring, you know how to modify poses in a way that will meet your body's needs.
Interesting. Fascinating. Yeah, that makes sense. That's so helpful to just kind of, know what to expect. And that makes a lot of sense. Well, yeah. And I think I really appreciate this conversation because I think it will, allow some people to kind of move past some of the things that are getting in their way and kind of move into a yoga practice, because like I say, it's more, and like you say, it's more than just an exercise. And it's a really efficient. It gets a lot done, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It does. Well, we're all about wholeness, and we always ask our guests a little bit about their ideas. What comes to your mind? How do you think about the idea of wholeness? What does it mean to you?
That's a great question. And it's a really important thing that I'm trying to constantly remind people of. And we learn in yoga as well, which is there's a lot of experts who want to sort of focus in on one area, and it's as though that piece is separate from other pieces. So I like to think about wholeness, especially when I'm talking about wellness and health. So when I say, are you healthy? Are you well? That doesn't just mean the operation of your organs. It doesn't just mean your metabolic health. It doesn't just mean your cognitive health or your emotional health or your psychological health. That's everything is one. There's nothing that is not connected to the other. When my physical body is healthy and functioning well, my mind operates better. When my mind is operating better, I make choices that will then keep my physical body well. When my mental and physical body are well and operating, my emotional state is probably fairly healthy and regulated as well. So wholeness and wellness and health are this beautiful thing, again, of being interconnected. And I really love it too when we laugh as yogis all the time, because a lot of the principles that we're taught that have existed for thousands of years are now being discovered by science. Discovered by science, what happens in your gut biome can impact your mood. Oh, wow. So we've known that, right? So there's, everyone's talking about the vagus nerve. Well, that's half of the practice of yoga and breathing and humming is vagal toning. So it is this idea of wholeness is the fact that we may have different attributes. I have hair, I have skin, I have bone, but all of it is me. I may have a physical body, an energetic body, a mental body, an emotional body, but all of it is me. It is whole, and it's never not whole. That's the part that's beautiful, is we may feel or have the conception that something is severed from us, but it's never not there. There's nothing that we're not. So wholeness is the idea that we are always whole and that everything is impacting everything else.
When most people are asked what they want, they will answer, I want to be happy. But happy takes practice. And that's what the Wholeness Library is all about. So check it out free at thewholenessnetwork.com.